Welcome. Thank you for standing by. All participants will be able to listen only until the question and answer session of today's conference. At the time, if you would like to ask a question, you do so by pressing star, then 1, and recording your first and last name. Today's conference is being recorded. Any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would turn the call over to your host for today, Mr. Daniel Davis. You may begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Professionals with Disabilities webinar in celebration of National Disability Employment Awareness Month, or NDEAM. The action of healthcare and employment among people with disabilities, critical topic. Nearly 20% of Americans have disabilities. Professional students in key health fields and healthcare providers with disabilities still are serious barriers throughout the training and careers, barriers that reflect the challenges too many Americans with disabilities still face in accessing healthcare that others take for granted. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Meredith Rand, who will provide an overview of today's event and introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Daniel. Today we will hear from medical professionals with disabilities who are flipping the script and working to enhance inclusion of people with disabilities by working to improve healthcare training curricula and increase the access to and quality of healthcare for people with disabilities. The agenda is as follows. We will first hear from Dr. McKee, Dr. Michael McKee of the University of Michigan, then Dr. Lisa Iazzoni of Harvard Medical School, Karen McCullough, the co-founder and director of the National Organization of Nurses with Disabilities, and finally Neera Jain of the University of Auckland. The presentations will be followed by a 15-minute question and answer session. At the conclusion of Ms. Jain's presentation, the operator will provide directions as to how to enter your question into the Q&A queue. Thank you all for joining us, and Dr. McKee, you may begin your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. All right. Thank you so much. My name is Michael McKee. I'm with the University of Michigan Department of Family Medicine. And my focus for today, again, just to celebrate the Disability Awareness Month, one of the things that is frequently forgotten is our contribution in the healthcare workforce or even for other professional careers. One of the main take-home messages I wanted to make sure people take them is the concept that disability needs to be a vital part of the diversity equation. And so today I'm going to be talking about mainly from the angle of deaf and hard of hearing medical providers, and also just kind of providing some input from many of my colleagues as well. Meredith, can you advance the slide? Okay. So one of the important things is realizing that we are wholly really underrepresented in healthcare. And we've already now passed the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now it's already been 26 years ago. And yet we still remain underrepresented both in the student body and also as medical professionals. There's only right now about 1% of medical students and 2% of practicing professionals who self-report some form of a disability. So we have a long way to go to make that truly reflective of the patient background that we serve. And the challenge with this is that we're still, professional schools are still focused on more of an organic technical standard. So, for example, in the situation for myself, the fact that I could not hear well was automatically, kind of a quick no for many professionals. And just thinking about more from a functional technical standard, I could do the job with the appropriate accommodations. That's a key component that we're trying to have medical schools, other professional schools realize that they need to make that mind shift. the slide once more. So why is it important to include us? Certainly, the quick thing is we have a diverse healthcare workforce. Teams outperform teams that are not diverse. And the thing also applies when you include us as well. We're not more creative, but able to troubleshoot, problem solve for a large and unique population base. So these are individuals that many providers struggle to not only relate but understand their needs. So that we need to be present as part of the medical workforce and to improve their care. This is a population, similar to many of the other minority populations, struggle with a whole host of health and so healthcare barriers as well. So individuals frequently complain about the low satisfaction, quality of care that they receive when they see the providers. It's important that we need to not only help to train the workforce that's already there, but the best way to do that is not only make our team more diverse, and that directly influences the behavior of their health professionals. The other thing is really difficult to teach for medical students and other health professional students is the concept of empathy. And for many of us who have a disability, that comes quickly and pretty easily because of our life experiences. And so that's a skill that is under-recognized, but very powerful when we relate to our patients, especially patients with chronic illnesses, as well as people with disabilities. So the thing is important is that because of when you think of accommodations, think of strategies to overcome any potential barriers as a learner and also as a professional. The applications of those approaches can be applicable for patients as they're trying to figure out how they can improve their independence, how they can function in their homes, their careers, even their schools, and their relationships as well. The other is, and I know when I was in medical school, there was actually no disability training that we received, and I hear that story from the other medical schools. And actually, it's sort of a hit and miss. And so the presence of us being there a helpful way to not only teach both professionals and students around us. There's also unique strategies that we can incorporate when we relate to patients. Think about unique approaches, also use of certain technology, assistive devices, light arms. There's a whole bunch of different things, and I'll explain that in a moment. Let's go to the slide. I put this example up here. Certainly the first picture doesn't apply to me. That wouldn't work. But obviously, just in my medical school, in my training, as well as my professional career, been a huge evolution in the stethoscope, especially the amplified stethoscopes. So from that first device I had, which is the second picture onto the left, a earphone that would go over my ears and my hearing aids. This actually was quite loud and actually would amplify it to about 100 plus decibels. So even patients could hear their lung and heart sounds, which, it could be quite amusing. There were certainly challenges with using this device. It led me to other much more refined amplified stethoscopes, not only better in quality, but my needs also changed as well as I became a cochlear implant recipient my residency years. And that allowed me to take advantage of the cardionic stethoscope, which is the fourth one. This was a device that allowed me to directly plug in the stethoscope to my cochlear implant. I don't have one other picture, but as a medical student, we also use a company called Bloodline Technologies, which allow for a handheld phonocardiogram. And what's nice about that is that it gave me a visual ability to look at heart sounds. So looking with the sound waves, detect murmurs, allow me to work with the regular amplified stethoscope to listen to lung sounds. So these strategies are really useful for any of us, but it also required me to work closely with the coaches and cardiologists to make sure that I'm listening to the appropriate sounds. So it's important to make sure that we have the support available to work with like myself, trainees, and professionals like myself as well. Currently, at this point now, I've moved on to the second to last photo, in which I've used the ThinkLab stethoscope, and it's kind of cutting edge, looks kind of like a futuristic stethoscope, but works quite well with the cochlear implant. It also works with an app you can use on your iPhone or Android. It's another useful tool to provide both audio and visual to hear lung and heart sounds. But the thing is that we are moving on to now handheld echocardiograms. So this shift is helping all of us. And medical students nowadays, in some places, are even learning how to use the handheld echo, which, given visual reliance, can be quite applicable for deaf hard of hearing students. So this back to the whole concept of organic versus technical standards. So it's studied with kind of thinking that first photo, I really need to be able to hear it all. I have an amplified stethoscope, and they applied to an organic technical standard of not be a provider at this point. But thinking about functional technical standards, thinking about the abundance of technology, the vast and rapid rate of advancements that we have, that actually allows us to think more about the functional, much more current approach in terms of obeying the technical standards in many of the health professional schools. So this slide. There are approaches to incorporating technology to overcome some of the barriers has also helped to kind of modify and make it much more applicable for patients, makes it more friendly for them. So like these alarms get pushed for that, not only on an organizational level, but also among the different individuals. That helps me for patients who are bedside, pay attention to the light going off, and they have hearing loss themselves. About the general population, we have roughly about anywhere from 14 to 17% of the population has a hearing loss. So that's a group. The other is there's also movement, and this is happening very quickly, is the voice-to-text systems. So like Dragon, even Google, and with the major software programs actually boost your accuracy. This has not only become another possible tool to use down the road, as long as the technology is there and it's reliable. That's going to be a huge asset for many of the deaf and hard of hearing patients and providers both. On this slide, you can see a picture of another deaf and hard of hearing provider who has now moved on and developed this product where there's a clear mask. The mask is one of the challenging aspects for when we receive our training, because many of us can lip read or see the expressions of the person wearing the mask. But one of the benefits that we've noticed is that when we use this, even adults felt that using these masks not only help them to relate to the providers, so they were terrified, they weren't as scared. So universal design concept of helping everybody, especially with the hearing loss, also other lot of benefits too. And then technology advancements, now we are able to do remote cart service. We are right now, as I'm talking, we can see a cart service with captioning services, and that can happen anywhere. And then for video remote interpreting. Keep in mind that these are more like technology approaches, but there's many others, including in-person interpreters. So the point is that we need to be creative, but also engage both and patients when we think about what technology or accommodations works best for them. Let's go to the slide. Advance the slide. This slide, there's been a lot of advocacy that's taken place to really help break down many of the barriers to allow deaf hearing students be able to advance in their careers or even enrolled in medical schools or nursing schools. Fortunately, despite being 26 years out from the ADA, we still have these battles. They're frequent. We're still battling with many older mindsets that we cannot simply do the job. As we've now seen over the past couple decades, efforts have grown. We have actually been successful. We are now even medical chairs. We have two that I know of that are deaf and hard of hearing chairs of medical departments. One at University of Arkansas, and the other one is here at University of Michigan. We are successful, and this actually should be able to open doors. Unfortunately, some doors still remain closed, and despite the advocacy efforts of organizations like the Association of Medical Professionals with Hearing Loss, as well as from the Department of Justice, or even just lobbying or advocacy on the individuals themselves, we could struggle with that. And I even have a pretty powerful story in which a chair of a department actually told me that I never become a successful doctor because of my hearing loss, but went on to the next step to simply say that a sole response from another hearing student would be a successful doctor. So we'll have those kind of mindsets, they trying to shut the doors, and those need to be changed, and we need to make sure that those doors are fully open and equitable as well. We have a couple articles here that I put up, and feel free to check them out. And they're showing not only the barriers that remain, but some of the progress that we've had. Unfortunately, despite all the advocacy, sometimes we resort to litigation, which is really sort of a last resort, but unfortunately does still need to happen at times. So what we're trying to do is advocate for ourselves without having to resort to that level, but sometimes it does happen. So advance this slide. Is that we need to do a better job. It's making sure that individuals with disabilities, learners with disabilities, including the hard of hearing students, that there's an opportunity for them to be able to interact with the healthcare environment to see if this is a career they want to undertake, medical careers, for example. I'm not aware of any programs that's available for in a healthcare environment for deaf hearing students. Most of them, they tend to be more based on racial, ethnic minority groups. So we have not implemented this successfully yet. With the exception of the Rochester Bridges to the Doctorate program, this is the only program that I'm aware of has really set up a program, a pipeline, so to speak, for biomedical careers. This really historically has been set up for biomedical scientists, but it's really kind of providing a model that also could be implemented in a medical setting as well. But programs are critical because we can't just expect the numbers of learners and professionals with disabilities will grow without these kind of programs being implemented. Let's advance slide once more. The Association of Medical Professionals with Hearing Losses is an upcoming organization conference that will be happening in Baltimore next year, June 1 to 4. It's an example of an organization that has grown in numbers as we have demonstrated that we are able to do the job. But at the same time, we need to work closely with one another, not only to get a network, but also to share successful stories. What are strategies that work for individuals may also be helpful for another one that's starting a little bit earlier in their career. And shopping not only assistive devices, technology, successful strategies. So the networking, advocacy, but we also become a resource for many medical schools and health professional programs. So with a student, and they're simply not aware what's the next step, how can we accommodate? So this has become a very useful organization. So I want to mention that this might be a useful tool and also a connection that you might want to develop as well. So that's the slide. So email and my website, if you have any further questions, free to contact me. I also have my Twitter account as well. I appreciate everybody taking the moment to listen to me and appreciate that. Thank you.
you so much, Dr. McKee. Dr. Iazzoni, you may end your presentation. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Next. Hello, I'm starting off with a picture of a fossil from the Cambrian age. It's a trilobite, which is about 520 million years old. I wanted to make the point that because I am firmly from the pre-ADA generation, I often feel like a fossil, but acknowledge that that's even a little old for me. But it's important for the younger folks out there to hear the stories to remember why this law is so important. Next slide. Picture shows Gordon Hall at Harvard Medical School, the large marble edifice overseeing the quadrangle. I started HMS on September 8th of 1980. At the time, I had a 4-year history of shadowy, on-again, off-again symptoms that got to be the manifestations of multiple sclerosis. But I was young, busy, invincible, and never sought medical treatment because symptoms would go away and I would be back to my normal active self. That first semester at med school, the symptoms returned with a vengeance, and I was finally diagnosed with MS. HMS was a harsh place to be someone in my situation. In my 4th year, when I finally was at the point of applying for an internship and residency, I refused to write my recommendation letter. I there was never able to train to become a practicing physician. Next slide. This shows what President George Herbert Walker Bush said was the proudest moment of his presidency, the July 26, 1990 signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. ADA would prevent future medical students from experiencing the same discrimination that I encountered, I think. But I believe even today that these protections remain fragile and are constantly being tested, as Michael kind of suggested earlier, especially in the training of healthcare professionals. So we need to keep vigilant to keep the ADA strong. After medical school, I became a health policy researcher, and a dozen years later started focusing on healthcare disparities for people with disabilities. Next slide. Years after the ADA, there was another watershed moment in 2000 when Healthy People 2010 was published, shown on this slide. Every 2 years, the federal government, can you go back to Healthy People 2010? Slide, please. Okay. Every 10 years, the federal government sets public health priorities for the next decade, and People 2010 set those goals for the decade starting in the year 2000. This is the first time that people with disabilities were identified as a disparities population by Healthy People. It was especially critical that Healthy People stated that erroneous assumptions and misconceptions about the lives, values, and expectations of people with disability contribute to disparities in their health and health care. Next slide. Healthy People 2020, shown on this slide, appeared. Interestingly, this volume focused on disadvantages in the social determinants of health that people with disabilities experience as contributors to their worse health and health care compared to persons without disabilities. Next slide. Now, we all have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs depicted on this slide. People with disabilities experience disadvantages all the way up Maslow's hierarchy, from physiology to safety to love/belonging to esteem, and finally to self-actualization. Next slide. We have a few minutes to give some examples of the kinds of healthcare disparities that people with disabilities experience. The next few slides look at screening tests recommended by the Youth Preventive Services Task Force for all people, which should include people with disabilities. In this slide, PAP test rates for women with disabilities are uniformly significantly lower than for women without disability, the red bar on the left. The rates of PAP testing vary by disability type. Women with limitations in self-care have the lowest rates, followed by women with mental health disability. Next slide. This looks specifically at PAP testing among women with mobility disability. It's that as women's mobility gets worse, the rates of PAP testing fall. So women with a worse mobility have PAP test rates 20% lower than without disability. Slide. This slide looks at mammography rates. Again, women with disability have lower rates than do non-disabled women. Women with self-care limitations have the lowest rate, 15% lower than among non-disabled women. Next. All of you have heard of Obamacare, but you might not know that Section 4203 of the Affordable Care Act required the federal government to develop standards to make medical diagnostic equipment accessible for people with disability. One of several explanations for their lower Pap test and mammography rates is women with disability cannot access mammography machines or onto exam tables for Pap tests. These came out in January of 2017. By December of 2017, the current administration decided not to pursue rulemaking about where accessible equipment must be available. Accessible healthcare facilities can contribute to findings such as those shown on this slide, which presents breast cancer mortality rates for women with disabilities compared to other women. In all different stages, women with disabilities are much more likely than other women to die from all causes, not surprisingly. But most importantly, and similarly, for all except stage 2, women with disabilities are much more likely than other women to die from breast cancer. Slide. Research that we've done that part of this is because women with disability get worse quality care than non-disabled women, especially lower rates of radiation therapy after breast-conserving surgery. Part might be because radiation therapy is not fully accessible to women with disability. I interviewed women with mobility disability who subsequently developed early-stage breast cancer to learn about their experiences. For example, from Pam, who has cerebral palsy. Instead of having Velcro straps or some other comfortable way to keep her arms from moving during radiation therapy, they did move because of her CP. Radiation therapy technicians use masking tape to keep her arms still on the radiation therapy table every day she went. It'd be surprising to find that women with disability who experience situations like Sue must seek radiation therapy even though it is clinically indicated. Next. They say that's just a drop in the bucket, but I need to stop there. Thanks.
Thank you much, Dr. Iazzoni. Karen, you may start your presentation. Thank you.
So, I wanted to just share with you that today we are celebrating our 15th anniversary this year, because we started in 2003. But just about an hour and a half ago, we were also inducted into the Susan and Daniel Disability Mentoring Hall of Fame. So that is really a big honor for us, and this is the first time that's being shared. So we have a different approach today because I'm talking about nursing. And I want to share a little bit with you first about what our mission is. We are directed to being an open membership, cross-disability, professional organization that work to provide equity for people with disabilities and chronic health conditions in nursing through education and advocacy. And very briefly, a few facts about our organization. It is volunteer directors that assume the leadership, the operational, and programmatic responsibilities for the organization without compensation. So we have no paid staff. 60% of our board must be people with disabilities, where the majority are nurses with disabilities. So we truly are very much a consumer-driven grassroots organization. But our directors hold a variety of expertise. They may be employed in positions such as nurse educators, researchers. They work in the clinical arena of operating room, telemetry, palliative care. They lead other nonprofit organizations. We have a case manager. Some of us have small businesses, and others also work in the other social sectors. We are geographically dispersed across the United States. Unique features about us, and I'm pretty much out there as well. Directors who are disabled believe that disclosing their disability or chronic health condition publicly provides the education on what is possible for what nurses can do. Please, slide, please. I'm going to get into the services because that gets into the things that we have learned I want to share. Since 2004, we have been contacted by parents, high school students, nursing students, nurses with disabilities, other healthcare professionals, and workers with disabilities. So I've collected a lot of data over the last 14 years on what's happening in the healthcare arena. It provides resources, information support, encouragement, and mentoring for some individuals with the same or similar chronic health condition or disability, provide mentoring as requested or that may be initiated by non, and as we can. We conduct presentations, we publish articles, and so forth. The point here is that our focus is on self-advocacy and self-determination. Nurses identify ourselves as healthcare professionals, and I wanted to talk about opportunities because this is really important since we're observing National Disability Employment Awareness Month. According to the American Nurses Association, we have 4 million registered nurses in this country. But according to Career One Stop, not all of them are working, but we are a very huge population of healthcare professionals in this country. In addition to that, NA estimates that 500,000 nurses will retire by 2022. I'm going to be one of them, and about 11 to 15% growth in opportunities. And I will say that if you go towards the western states, the mountain states, the growth could be as much like in Idaho as 37%. So we know a lot of the nursing shortages are out in the western and mountain states. The U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics, says that we need 1.1 million new RNs to replace the RNs that are retiring and to build capacity to address the nursing shortage. But first we have to say, okay, we have employment, but first we have to have education. So we have to recognize the fact that nursing is a STEM career. That means science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Students must be academically qualified and must meet prerequisites to apply to nursing programs. In comparison to 2003, when we were first founded, we are seeing that there are more students with disabilities entering nursing programs, and many and most are successful. Slide. Now, in education. Some universities and colleges are less proficient in providing reasonable accommodations, while some schools provide accommodations in the classroom but do not provide accommodations in the clinical setting. And one of the issues that is always playing out, and Dr. McKee was addressing that, were the issues of technical standards, where technical standards focus on functional abilities and continues to be a barrier that can exclude academically qualified students with disabilities from some schools. That is, you have to hear, you have to see, you have to bend, you have to walk, you have to talk, you have to touch, you have to smell, and so forth. To address those technical standards in 2015, 2 of our colleagues, and in fact, Dr. Beth Marks was president of our organization at the time, Dr. Sarah Ailey, who's on our advisory committee, wrote a white paper on inclusion of students with disabilities in nursing education programs, and they did that for the California Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities. The white paper is available on the Association of Colleges of Nursing website, and because our website is currently under construction, we will have it there once that website goes public. So please. So I'm moving between education and nursing employment because they're so interconnected, you can't separate one from the other. But we want to look at nursing across the lifespan, and we want to get disclosure. Some of this is very profound. Nurses with disabilities in the workforce. We've been in contact with nurses with disabilities for the last 14 years, and we learned a great deal. We have nurses that are not apparent in their disabilities. They do disclose that they have a disability to their employer. We have nurses who are self-accommodating for themselves. They do not disclose to their employer. Have disclosure of disability to employer. Documentation is provided and accommodations are received. And then have disclosure with a vision of documentation, but they don't always receive those accommodations and may wait for extended periods of time for those accommodations. Nurses, and this is very hard for me to share, but it's true. Nurses who have been on FMLA, the family leave, their job no longer exists. It's downsized by the time they're ready to return to work. And we had some nurses who are terminated or forced to retire based on employer feedback that they do not believe they can continue to be a nurse. So please. I'm going to share on a personal note, I did not become disabled until after I'd been through nursing school and had some work experience, and I was told I could no longer be a nurse because I was visually impaired. And that really impacted my own sense of identity on who I was because I identified so strongly with being a nurse, and so I decided nursing about critical thinking and about leadership, so I'm going to be a nurse. I want to share a study that was by one of the members of our board of directors on nurses with disabilities in the workforce, by Dr. Don Dubsky. It is an unpublished dissertation, and we hope it will be published very soon, but she did her interviews with 21 nurses with disabilities, and we wanted to compare what we're finding in our data versus what she found in 2017, just this last year. Found that self-accommodation was very common, but what was very sad was nurses feared that requesting accommodations from employers would threaten their chance of being hired or remaining on the job. Also shared in this study that it's inevitable that they would have to request accommodations sooner or later because chronic conditions and disabilities sometimes worsen. And the reason why they do that, they finally come to terms they have to do it, is all about patient safety. We also learned from this study that self-advocacy was really important and how a person is able to advocate for themselves to grasp the process of accommodations is important. But they also found in the study that there's a lack of process in the healthcare institutions where employers offered no process in the workplace that described how to request accommodations. And there was employer resistance to the cost of accommodations, and we did this for a long period of time, no matter where you are, what job you do, patient safety, and that can nurses do jobs, the essential functions of the job. And the sixth one is nurses settled for less. Very disturbing because they may be provided an accommodation, but accommodation is not working. And so they don't say anything, they just deal with it. And the seventh was about our disability identity. Nurses with disabilities had varying perceptions of how they identified with disability, and how they identified with disabilities did impact their process for requesting accommodations. Slide, please. Changes in education, continued challenge. For sure is that disability services professionals education has improved dramatically since 2003 when we were founded, and that they are providing a heightened quality of accommodations. More student access offices have been established and located on more campuses, particularly schools that are directed to health sciences. It makes a difference. Many of the schools of nursing have revised or are revising their technical standards to be more inclusive of students with disabilities, but challenges still exist in exclusion of some schools. Students with disabilities are becoming academically prepared, but many secondary school students, those that we talk to in high school, are not aware that they could be a nurse. And more institutions of higher education, as we're seeing in the last 15 years, understand that their responsibilities are directed to providing accommodations based on the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, I think 1973, and as amended, and the Americans with Disabilities Act 1990, and the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment Act of 2008. Slide, please. About the current status. Only hitting on some of the more important topics, but not all of them in our time frame. But let's look at the current status. Negative attitudes, stereotypes, and continue to exist, and they're directed to students and nurses with chronic health conditions and disabilities, both in school and at the workplace. But the positive or good news is beginning to see some improvement in that. We also know that employers remain concerned about directing of patient safety, the accommodations, as well as can the individual perform the essential functions of the job, which I find interesting because if accommodations are provided, of course they're going to be able to do the job. But we have no data that is available right now that say that nurses with disabilities practice less safely than their non-disabled peers. It's just a perception, a stereotype that because we have a disability, we can't practice safely. Employer accountability on the provision of accommodation needs to be established and reviewed for those that have accommodation policies. More diversity and inclusion initiatives are needed at healthcare institutions and other health industries. One of the areas that we do know is, and while it is not formally required at all, the Office of Finance Contract Compliance Program 503 rules suggesting that a goal of 7% representation of people with disabilities in the workforce. I do believe that there has had some impact in providing incentives for more diversity and inclusion institutions. So, nurses with disabilities are transforming the practice of nursing. Now, this is true in most schools, but not all, that clinical tasks are no longer being required to be performed in the exact same procedure as everyone else. And when we first started out 15 years ago, that's the way it was. So we now know that students and nurses are performing tasks differently, but they are able to maintain the integrity of the task and the outcomes are the same. For sure, as Dr. McKee was talking about it, the advancements in technology, in adaptive devices, in smartphone apps, and other equipment provides the opportunity for students and nurses with disabilities to be at a level playing field with non-disabled peers. I would not be on this webinar if it was not for some of the technology that's available to me. Accommodations provided, and we hear this a lot still, accommodations that are provided are not special privileges, but necessary to meet the needs of individuals with disabilities to assist in their success in school and at the workplace, and they have equal opportunity to choose nursing as a career. Slide, please. In the transformation, this is what we believe, and this all follows up with some of what Dr. McKee was saying. NDEAM believes that students and nurses with disabilities are providing culturally relevant care, and quite honestly, some of the care would not exist unless we are included in the workforce. Enhancing communication is incredible. It's amazing how people will talk to us when they might not talk to someone who doesn't have a disability. We also see increasing patient-consumer involvement with greater self-determination directed to self-care, increased motivation, on wellness and independence. And we assist in the development of creative strategies for long-term care. So advancing health outcomes is one of the things that we believe that we play a big role in. And as hospitals that have diversity and inclusion initiatives, many companies are doing this across the country. They want to have people included in their workflows that represent their customer or patient base. It makes sense. So we believe that we assist people with their personal goals, whether we're in the clinical setting or in outpatient or in some other role that we hold, and we're definitely improving patient-consumer satisfaction. Please. And thank you. I think it's important to note here, because I'm going to retire soon, that the National Organization of Nurses with Disabilities, we have a very strong bond between and among nurses with disabilities, and also those that support us. We experience challenges, barriers, and for some, a lot of discrimination. But the members of the NDEAM Board of Directors are passionate about the mission. We want students and nurses with disabilities to experience many of the challenges that non-directors have. Our work continues. Thank you much.
Thank you much, Karen. Because of time, I just want to notice everyone in the audience, we're going to move forward with Neera's presentation next, and we'll stay on for some Q&A, but we're conscious of everyone's time. It's almost 3 o'clock Eastern, so stay on the line for Q&A if you're able. If you're not, we absolutely understand. With that, Neera, please begin your presentation. Thank you.
My name is Neera Jain, and I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and today I'm speaking to you from Australia. I'm also a board member for the Coalition for Disability Access in Health Science and Medical Education, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. I'm a co-author and co-PI of the research that informed the recent report, Accessibility, Inclusion, and Action in Medical Education, and that was published by the Association of American Medical Colleges at the University of California, San Francisco. Today, I'm going to talk to you about access for students with disabilities in medical education. Next slide. I want to start today with a quote from a medical student participant in the AAMC research, and what they said was, if you're not persistent, if you're not perseverant, you suffer. Not ridiculously persistent and dogged and determined to be heard or listened to, you have no hope at all. If you're not willing to find your way yourself, you won't make it. High standards are not required of students without disabilities, and that's not fair. Start with that because what this student describes, the fight to be included in medical school, the labor required on the part of students to figure out accommodations and educate their schools, is unfortunately very common. Next slide. Next. So to give a sense of the prevalence of students with disabilities in U.S. medical education, this data comes from a study by Meeks and Herzer published in JAMA in 2016. And this study is notable not just because it's the most recent, but also because it was the first study of prevalence to include a wider definition of disability as clarified in the 2008 amendments to the ADA. They found that overall, 2.7% of medical students disclosed a disability to their school. So students with disabilities remain underrepresented in medical education. Of the students disclosing, the vast majority had non-visible disabilities, so things like learning disabilities, ADHD, psychological, and chronic health conditions. Next slide. A bit about the Lived Experience Project. That's the research project I co-led with Dr. Lisa Meeks that was funded by the AAMC and UCSF. We interviewed 47 medical students, residents, and physicians with disabilities across the United States. And our aim was to document the stories of learners and physicians through their training, barriers they experienced, and what supported their training. We found broken into two major areas, those that related to the structure of education and those that related to the culture and climate of medical training. In the report, we offer comprehensive considerations for education programs that follow from what participants shared with us. And I really encourage you to check that report out for a lot more detail. Next slide. Focus on here is what I see as some of the larger complexities of access in medical education based on the findings from this project and also the findings from my current research. This issue is stigma and attitudes. As I have described so far, disability carries significant stigma in medical education, and students are very, very aware of it. Stigma might be expressed in attitudes from peers, clinic coworkers, faculty, or school administrators, and they might be expressing surprise or disbelief that someone with a visible disability is in a physician role. They might encounter negative attitudes towards accommodations or suggestions to pursue another goal because medicine will be too difficult. In response, students often felt they had to be twice as good in order to overcome this stigma. Students described concealing aspects of their disabilities in order to manage others' perceptions to be seen as capable. Another concern is knowledge gaps and how this affects the accommodations process. In the Lived Experience Project, we heard many reports that schools were unequipped to provide accommodations to students in medical clinical settings. In some cases, people assigned disability service responsibilities at medical schools did not know about accommodations and the parameters of disability law. Similarly, when a Central University Disability Service Office is in charge, they may lack expertise in accommodations for the medical setting. And some schools relied on students to inform them what accommodations they needed. But students were not well versed in the tasks of medical education yet, and often also didn't know the breadth of what might be possible. And think about this in the context of stigma, we can see how this invites problems. Students may be hesitant to say what they need for fear that it might exclude them. Against this, upskilling disability service providers about disability access and medical education can help to address this. Recognizing the tendency for knowledge gaps to occur and actively addressing them, so who's at the table, what knowledge don't we have, and how can we get it, and ensuring that we're including the student voice in safe ways can help to address these issues. And this follows concerns with policy and practice. In many schools, we heard that clear accommodation policies were not in place. In residency programs in particular, often there was not a confidential person to discuss accommodation needs with. Many residents described not knowing if accommodations were even available at that level. I guess having clear, consistent policies, ensuring they're visible and available to refer to, identifying clear and confidential pathways to request accommodations, and reviewing existing policies and technical standards for currency, clarity, and inviting language versus legalistic language can really help to address that. This access remains a significant concern. Students described access concerns in clinical settings for provider spaces, so spaces that medical providers use that maybe patients don't use, so things like scrub rooms for operating rooms, staff bathrooms, and rooms for providers within hospitals. They're often not accessible. In schools, clinical skills and anatomy labs and halls often weren't fully accessible. In schools and hospitals, automatic doors aren't omnipresent. Getting them installed takes time and money. So to counter this, taking proactive measures to address inaccessibility, even where you don't have a current need, planning for a student or employee to come along by having a progressive access plan to upgrade gradually. This is well spent to pave the way for the people who are coming. Next slide. Where to from here? I want to point you to some helpful resources in addition to what's already been mentioned and some ongoing projects. First, in response to the need for better representation of doctors with disabilities, Dr. Lisa Meeks at the University of Michigan, along with Dr. Pam Liao from the University of Toronto, started a social media campaign called #DocsWithDisabilities. And you can check out that hashtag on Twitter and Instagram. It's an ongoing campaign. And I've provided one example from one of their infographics here on the slide of Dr. Molly Lubin talking about what her deafness brings to her practice as a psychiatrist and as a clinical educator. An important resource is the Coalition for Disability Access in Health Science and Medical Education. This is a professional community that's interested in improving disability access across the health professions. It's a group for people working in disability services at universities, faculty, and school administrators, and the group shares ideas, resources, and troubleshoots emerging concerns on our active listserv and at our annual symposium. The public website, hsmcoalition.org, also has a number of valuable resources that you may want to check out. And I want to suggest broad consideration of universal design in medical education. As current changes happen, movement towards things like competency-based evaluation and time variable programs, it's critical that we take these opportunities to consider how changes might affect students with disabilities and also use periods of change as opportunities to think about improving access from the ground up rather than as an afterthought. Next slide. So let's close with a final quote from our participant in the Lived Experience Project. He said, I think we're going to do something impactful. We want to have you here. If that doesn't look like what it looks like for other students, that's fine. I felt settled with where I was with that school after that conversation. So this is a medical student talking about what someone on their admissions committee said to them. To me, this quote exemplifies the idea of a culture of access that I'm studying in my current research. It's really the ideal experience that we want all students to have in medical education. Next slide. I just have some references and additional resources. These slides will be available afterwards for your reference. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nira, and to all of our presenters for such comprehensive information and important information in a short amount of time. Speaking of, we are going to launch our Q&A portion now. We will keep the Q&A portion to about 5 minutes. And operator, if you could go ahead and provide directions on to how to call in the questions. Thank you.
At this time, if you would like to ask a question, you may do so by pressing star, then 1. Please record your first and last name to ask your question, and to withdraw your question, you may press star, then 2. Once you ask your question on the audio portion, please press star 1 and record your first and last name. 1 moment.
This is Meredith. Dr. Michael McKee had to step away from the webinar, so he will not be available to answer any questions, but feel free to ask questions broader in nature or also specifically to speakers as well. Thank you.
For questions, I can read a couple that have come in over the messaging. the demand for speed during visits and the number of patients seen per hour or day or affect practitioners. Is any time accommodation? Time is money, so wonder about barriers resulting from economics.
Daniel, this is Karen McCullough. I had two responses. I know that in school we have students who have low vision. And in the clinical setting, they frequently will request a smaller patient load, which may or may not be granted, but the ones we've worked with, that's been granted. And what happens is, and this is really a great question that's asked, our nurses are generally choosing areas where they know that they can practice safely and they can meet the pace of requirement for their job. And so, but no matter what, the nurses have a heavy patient load, and one of the things ANA said is that the nursing shortage is causing a lot of job dissatisfaction because it's increased the stress on existing nurses that exist in the clinical setting. So I don't know if that quite answers the question. I think from the student side of it, accommodation would be provided. The likelihood is if you can't keep up with the pace, then you have to find another specialty to work in.
Sarah.
Yeah.
So, sure, I was going to just echo what Karen said and also say that oftentimes what we see for students who need maybe a little bit more time during the training is that once they develop techniques to do the work and get assistive technology in place, they build their speed over time. So they may need a time accommodation in the beginning as they're getting used to a setting or learning a skill. So that would be in training, but in the workplace it might be figuring out a setting, figuring out what works there, that then they're able to build speed over time. But I think Karen's absolutely right that what we see often is people self-selecting, as everyone does who goes into a health profession, self-selecting into a specialty and workplace that matches their disability-related needs, their interests, and so on.
So, other question that we have online is, will any presenters be able to provide information on whether there's a professional organization for medical professionals who are blind? Information on tools and accommodations for blind medical students and staff patients.
This is Nira. So as far as I know, there isn't a specific professional organization for medical professionals who are blind. But what I will say is that there have been a number of blind or low vision medical students who are now practicing. And so there are people out there, people like Tim Cordes, who went to the University of Wisconsin, Kurt Herzer, who went to Johns Hopkins, and Nat Gleason, who went to UCSF, are three more people that I know of. And reach out to them directly. And also the Society for Physicians with Disabilities is a resource across disability types that people can contact, and folks are members there who provide resources. And again, the coalition is a great resource if, I'm not sure who this person is, but if there's somebody who works at an education institution, the coalition is a great resource. And
one more question that came in on the chat line, and then Meredith, I'll toss it back to you. For Lisa, regarding the regulations for accessible exam tables, is it no longer required or just on hold? I can actually add to that if you want me to.
Right. So basically, the thing that happened in January was that standards were approved in the final rulemaking in the Federal Register. The next step that needed to be taken was for the Department of Justice to do what's called scoping, where they say, okay, now we've got these standards, how widely do these types of equipment need to be available? For example, does 1 out of 10 exam table need to be a height adjustable exam table? That rulemaking was what was put on hold by the Justice Department on December 26th of 2017. So any healthcare provider can go out and buy this accessible equipment and can request, try to make sure that it meets the standards that were forth in the final rulemaking in January, but it's just that there will not be an absolute requirement by the Department of Justice that number of tables, for example, be accessible.
That's absolutely right, and just to elaborate very slightly on that, there is the Access Board standard is operative as a voluntary standard. It's available on the Access Board's website, which we can provide after the call. And one thing that you should know is, folks should know on the call, is that a number of providers are beginning to move toward those standards, either various hospitals that are engaging in settlements with the disability community to provide accessibility, or sometimes it's actually being affirmatively provided by providers or insurers. One example is Sentence Provider Accessibility Initiative, where they're piloting in 3 states, and where my understanding is they are using bulk purchasing of accessible medical diagnostic equipment to address accessibility needs. I'll put it back to Meredith, since I know we're at time.
Thank you, Daniel, Dr. Iazzoni, and Nira for those responses. Since we did indicate that questions should come through the Q&A line, operator, I just want to see if there's one that we can take from that line, and then I emailed all of the participants last night. Reminder about the webinar, feel free to email me back with any questions, and I can circulate amongst ourselves, and we can work to get you a response. And also, we will be sending out the slides as well. And thank you. There was some formatting issues with some of the slides, so that is because of our platform, so thank you for your patience with that. And with that, operator, could we please see if there are any other questions in the queue, and then we will conclude.
We do have a question. The question comes from Lance Marshall. You may ask your question.
Are there federal or state laws putting the granting of licenses for abilities, or is that something the medical licensing boards consider on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, I'll answer that. So this is a bit of a complicated answer, as you can imagine. Each state has a licensing board that issues medical licenses, and each state has a different process, so the questions they ask may differ. And the ways questions are asked is often complicated for people to know how to answer, because the questions can be something like, have you had mental health care before, or do you have a disability that will prevent you from providing care? And so often people don't know exactly how to answer it, and answering it can raise flags for licensing boards that create sometimes more trouble than they're worth. But it's up to the licensing board to handle that as they see fit. I think it's important to note that the American Medical Association recently issued a call to state licensing boards regarding questions that they ask about mental health, and recommending more focused questions asked of people's current functioning and whether there is something going on currently that is affecting their medical practice. And oftentimes what people will say is, even if they have a diagnosis, any type, any disability type, or including mental health, that they may have that, that, but it's not affecting their practice. They have measures in place to accommodate themselves. They're in treatment and it's not affecting their practice. And so just make sure those questions are focused to ensure people can answer in ways that make sense. So you may have a mental health condition, but it's not affecting your practice. And so kind of raising flags where we don't need to raise flags. So I guess I hope that answers your question, but it's complicated. And state licensing boards that evaluate that.
Karen, I just wanted to add to it. All of the nursing boards, I think their first priority is they need to ensure patient safety. And we have had students who have graduated who are now getting their first license who come back to us and say, what should I do? I have bipolar, but I'm on medication. I was 4 years working on a Bachelor of Science in nursing. I've had no problems, but what do I do? So I just wanted to reinforce what Nira was saying. If it raises a red flag, but also honesty and integrity is also important in all of our health professions. But that it's still, I think some boards maybe have not traveled along as fast as many people with disabilities within the professions, whether it's medical school or nursing. I wanted to say, ensuring patient safety is one of the biggest issues for nursing.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you both, Karen and Nira, and thank you all the audience for the questions. But yes, thank you so much everyone for your time, especially in the event that we have gone over longer than we planned. Like I mentioned a few moments ago, I will be, the slides and a recording of this webinar will be posted to our website within a week. And also, if you have any other questions or follow-up items you would like to ask me, feel free to just respond to the email I sent last night. And for those that might not have it, my email is Meredith, MEREDTH.Raymond, RAYMOND, ACL.HHS.gov. And with that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and we look forward to advancing this work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Concludes today's conference. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.